Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Surah An-Nahl, chapter 16, verses 92 to 96 will be covered today. The Quran helps to optimize human efforts. There are a number of points covered in today's presentation, which should generate some discussion at the end of this talk. These are the references, and this is our contact in case there is any question, query regarding this presentation or any of the previous presentations. Recap verses 84 to 91 of Surah Nahl. Here the Quran tells us that all the striving on the path of Allah in measured steps gradually keeps progressing forward. Nothing remains unactioned or is outside the domain of the functioning of the laws of Allah. Abundance of kufr in the world does not mean that we should accept this and reconcile with it willingly. This is an important point over which we have gone through a number of times, that even if the results are not visible in the physical domain, we should keep striving on this path because gradually things do start to transform in our life. Follow the path steadfastly with patience and do not be distracted by kufr. Understand the functioning of the law of respite, as this provides strength to the human psyche. While making our efforts, keep studying the system of batil and its willing participants, for example, their continuous mutual wrangling. And by looking at them and studying them and seeing the evidence, one can clearly differentiate between two paths of life. And that is important, that the path of kufr is different from the path of iman. Keep taking note of all the evil, which is batil, which the human intellect and its hands create in the world. Never abandon the path of Allah. Keep reminding yourselves that by understanding and following the book of Allah, a Jamaat will emerge which will act as a witness for Allah in the world. Adl and Ihsan. And Adl deals with justice. Ihsan means if something is lacking, then we compensate individuals, human beings, by giving them something extra. Adl and Ihsan, together with other permanent values for the system of Deen, has the full potential to address man-created problems through a phased program of Rububiyat. An overview of today's presentation. By quoting the simile of a woman who breaks into untwisted strands the yarn she has spun after it has become strong, the Quran has asked us to not let our efforts in life go to waste. We are witnessing examples of this before our very eyes in the world in which we live under the man-made systems. Why do human beings behave like this? Next point is, this is because they ignore the law of requital and think they can get away with their evil deeds in the world. The Quran declares that no human being can escape the consequences of his or her deeds. Allah has created human beings with choice and intent and has provided the guidance of Wahi so that those who willingly follow it fulfill the purpose of the creation of the universe and their own creation. They can enhance their own value and eminence in order to acquire an eternal existence through their own choice. So the important point is that we should try to understand and come to grip with our own creation, because the universe is there for a far longer time than our own physical existence. So it is important to know the purpose of our own creation from the Quran. What do they need to do? Firstly, fulfill their covenants and never fail in this respect. Secondly, remind themselves that it is through Allah's Wahi they can get the best out of this life. Thirdly, the recipe for success is to stay steadfast and aim for the best and balanced conduct, and remain focused on all the divine attributes of Allah. Keep reminding themselves that success on this path of Allah is guaranteed and that it is not otherworldly. The transformation in the human self becomes evidence in itself on this path, illuminated by the light of the Quran. Now we go to the first verse of today's presentation, 1692, path pursued without the light of Wahi. وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّتِي نَقَضَتْ غَزْلَهَا مِنْ بَعْدِ قُوَّةٍ أَنْكَاثًا تَتَّخِذُونَ إِيمَانَكُمْ دَخَلًا بَيْنَكُمْ أَنْ تَكُونَ أُمَّةٌ هِيَ أَرْبَى مِنْ أُمَّةٍ إِنَّمَا yablukumullahu bihi wala yubayyinanna lakum yawmal qiyamati ma kuntum fihi takhtalifun. And see that your condition does not become like that woman who spun thread with great toil and effort and then shredded it into pieces with her own hands. You make your agreements, words, and contracts, which should be the cause of assurance for peace and contentment, into the grounds for deception and conflict instead. And you do all this so that among you one party forges ahead of another party, i.e., in order to exceed each other in wealth and possessions, and false pride and power. You also do not care about agreements and commitments. Allah keeps on exposing these kinds of intentions of yours so that you can take instructions from this. Remember, when the time will arrive for the manifestation of outcomes, then all those matters in which you differ will emerge and appear in front. A number of points covered in this, and now let us look at some in more detail. Without the light of Wahi, all paths of human life lead to self-destruction. And this is an important statement, and we'll look into it in more detail. After noting some initial features of the system of Deen, here the Quran has noted some important aspects of the human psyche which are manifested when it operates outside the domain of the guidance of Wahi. How can someone destroy with his own hands that which he has built intentionally through hard work and by utilizing precious time in his life? So in this verse, an example is given that a woman who is putting together her own yarn and then she destroys it with her own hands. Why should human beings destroy the fruits of their own efforts? And this is something which is very important, and we'll go through it in more detail. If we look at human history, both on a long and short-term basis, we find countless examples of human self-destruction, both at an individual and at collective levels. A glaring example of the rise and fall of an extremely powerful nation is that of Hitler's Germany, which ascended rapidly commencing in 1933 and then destroyed itself by 1945. It is still struggling with these lingering effects, both physically and psychologically. We are witnessing the same phenomena with the US power, which is visibly declining before our eyes. Why does this happen? And that is something which is very interesting, that we can study it in the light of the Quran. And it's all related to human thinking, human rational side, human mind, and human cognitive abilities, that how human brain works in these circumstances. This is due to the fact that any human structure raised on the basis of the use of the human intellect alone has this self-destruction built into it. The dilemma of unbridled intellect. It is simply unavoidable, and this is where the Quran comes to our rescue and helps us to resolve these issues on a long-term basis, including the life of the hereafter. And this is a very important point, because Quran is asking us that once you follow this path, you will save yourself. You'll avoid these self-destruction tendencies. Instead, since you are following Haqq, it will be always constructive, and you will have a full assurance that Allah's laws will help you to get to your desired and intended destination. Expanding it further, this verse continues from the previous one on the theme of not fulfilling our commitments and covenants. And we know Quran has put a lot of emphasis on fulfilling our commitments and covenants. That if we fail to do that, then we essentially lack that strength in our character which is required to be a mu'min. Whether formal or informal, this includes our inner intentions and thoughts which sow the seeds of differences and doubts regarding serious matters of our finite physical life here in the world. That is why Quran says that you should not say things which you cannot fulfill. So we have to firmly look at it at an individual level as well as collective level, that the commitments which we make, we must fulfill them. There is no if and but in that. It has to be fulfilled 100%. We continuously witness how powerful nations as well as men in power use the evil creating relative values of might is right and divide and rule to exploit those who are intellectually backward and are physically weak or kept weak. This part of the verse, tattakhizuna imanakum dakhalan bainakum antakuna ummatun hiya arba min ummatin. Do not take your oaths to practice deception between yourselves, lest one party should be more numerous than another. This issue needs to be further scrutinized by studying the psyche which has not accepted Quranic guidance. It makes no difference whether it was offered this guidance or was ignorant of it. It is like burning one's finger in the fire. Whether one knows it will burn or not, the law will manifest its consequences. This is why the Quran repeatedly tells Mu'mineen to communicate its guidance onto others and not to keep quiet in the world. So important is that whatever agreements and commitments, whether we make them in our thoughts or otherwise, we must fulfill them. And that also means that before making those commitments, we should be fully aware of it. What will be the consequences of fulfilling these commitments and not fulfilling these commitments? Because that is the way we develop strength within ourself. Create new self as a proof. Another point of interest is, how do we know what kind of freedom the Quran is inviting us to, and can we understand its nature and expanse without its guidance? The aspects of the human psyche to which Allah draws our attention are simply not available outside the folds of the Quran, and the science of human psychology simply cannot access it without studying it. And this is an important point on which we should convince ourselves by studying the Quran as well as studying the environment within the man-made systems, that how the system functions. And we will see glaring examples of this aspect, that human psyche cannot reach those heights of eminence to which the Quran is asking us to come to. For example, the aspect of self-harm and self-destruction about which the Quran warns us and then invites us to deal with it effectively by first understanding the new life as a concept and then striving to acquire it. It is like taking paracetamol to alleviate a headache, whereas without taking it, we can never obtain the evidence for it. And that is something very important, that what Quran is telling us, we had to make it part of our cognition, part of our intellect, part of ourself in order to benefit from it, because then the changes start to take place within us. For example, it states, وَمَنْ جَاهَدَ فَإِنَّمَا يُجَاهِدُ لِنَفْسِهِ. And if any strive, they do so for their own self. This is also compared to the spider web. For example, in 29:41, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ كَمَثَلِ الْعَنكَبُوتِ اتَّخَذَتْ بَيْتًا وَإِنَّ أَوْهَنَ الْبُيُوتِ لَبَيْتُ الْعَنكَبُوتِ لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. The parable of those who take protectors other than Allah is that of the spider who builds a house, but truly the flimmiest of houses is the spider's house, if they but knew. And we can see this in the rise and fall of nations, that the strongest nations in the world, they gradually decline and then become ineffective in the world, and another nation comes and takes over their place. And the reason is because the values on which those arose, values on which those were built, those values are weak. And that is something which we should keep in mind. And Quran has drawn our attention to these aspects frequently. Human world has enough to bring out our best. The interactions of human beings help us to educate, train, and then through the practical application of whatever we learn to grow and develop ourselves. Here the Quran has noted that innama yablukumullahu bihi. Certainly in all this, Allah has made arrangement for you so that you can test your own abilities. The same fact is noted in another verse, Inna ja'alna ma'alal arde zinatallaha linabluwahum ayyuhum asanu amala. Whatever is created on planet Earth is for this purpose, that by using choice and intent, to manifest the most balanced conduct and deeds, provided opportunities to manifest latent potential. So the world is created in a way so that our best can come out. So that once we are about to leave this world, within the circumstances in which we lived, we shouldn't complain that I did not get enough time and enough interactions with others to sort myself out and to develop it. The last part of the verse is, وَلَا يُبَيِّنَنَّ لَكُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ مَا كُنْتُمْ فِيهِ تَخْتَلِفُونَ. All those aspects in which differences arose will be made clear on the day when the results of the deeds mature and manifest in front of our eyes. And this is not something for the life of the hereafter. Of course, these things will come out because the way of self develops, and whether we have managed to remove our dissonances or not. But right in this world, we can see that these differences lead to problems in the world. This is an important factual statement based on evidence with which we need to come to grips in order to understand the state of the world in which we live. All the chaos and imbalances we witness in the world are due to these inherent differences and dissonances at a basic level, which human beings fail to address using the Quranic guidance. And this point we have mentioned previously as well, that psychologically, continuously, doubts and suspicions arise in our mind, and we have to identify them and then overcome them. And this is where the Quran helps us, because unless we identify them, we cannot treat them, we cannot come to grips with them. The Quran has drawn our attention to this aspect in a number of verses. For example, 2:13 and 10:19. Let us go to the next verse, the basis for the creation of man, 1693. وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَلَكِنْ يُضِلُّ مَن يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ وَلَا تُسْأَلُنَّ عَمَّا كُنتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. This thought keeps arising in your heart that if this is what Allah has wished, then why He did not make all human beings alike and make all to tread on one path alone. This is true that, and these thoughts do arise in our minds as well as of today, that why Allah did not create all human beings without differences so that there wouldn't have been any problems in the world. If He had wished, then according to His law of the universe, He could have made you all alike. But He did not do this. He showed you the right path and left the decision up to you, so that if you wish, you can adopt it, and if you wish, then by abandoning it, you can set out on the wrong path. And this is done for this purpose, so that you are declared accountable for every deed of yours. Analyzing choice plus intent a bit further. These thoughts do cross the minds of many people who suffer at the hands of other human beings, i.e., due to the wrong systems in the world. However, when they come into the position of being able to change the system or are invited towards the Quran, most wish to conform with the former system which has benefited them. And we observe that a lot of people who come to the Quran initially and then they leave it because they become a bigger beneficiaries of the man-made systems. The issue for us to analyze is that if choice and intent is not given to man, then the creation of Allah becomes meaningless. And the Quran states that Allah does not create anything without haqq. The issue over here before us is that am I going to take that responsibility of following this path so that with a view to change the world, to replace the man-made system. And obviously we cannot replace the man-made system with the system of Deen unless we are fully committed to the system of Deen. Why do we need to understand the reason for the creation of human beings in the world? Firstly, not knowing this means that if the reason for this exists and we are not interested in it, then we are not using that cognitive aspect which needs to have this answer in order to manifest its potential. Because if we are not convinced about our own creation and its higher purpose and its eminence and loftiness side of it, then how are we going to convince ourselves? How are we going to follow this path? The Quran has summed it up succinctly, Inna hadainahu sabila imma shakiram wa imma kafura. Guidance is provided and it is our choice that whether we want to do shukr or we want to display kufr. And shukr we means to manifest our best for the good of everyone and bring out all those latent potentials with which we are endowed, and we are supposed to bring them out through our own efforts. Next, it is His choice to select a path in life. Secondly, there is a precise logic behind human creation in which Allah has provided humans with the cognitive mechanism which has the potential to create new life within us through the use of our intellect and reasoning by using the Quranic value system. We refer to this process of new life as noted, for example, in Surah An-Nahl verse 8:24, that the creation of new self through our own efforts based on iman and salih deeds is for which the universe has been created. And unless we create that, we will never come to grips with the higher purpose or haq of our own creation. And this is all within us. It is within our reach. It is at the level of our intellect and reasoning that we question the issues of our existence, problems in the world, etc., and then try to find solutions. Next is need for new life. I've tried to explain this aspect a bit more in detail. What do we mean by new life? If we look at the process which we use to make decisions in our daily life using our eye, we can see that the world we have collectively created around us is the product of this thought process. Hence, all the problems, developments, inventions, technical progress, inverted commas I put it, etc., are owed to the decision making of this eye. This eye is experiencing its life through the physical body which it inhabits. And this life is dependent on the way it is making these decisions and then acting on these in the outer world. And what is noted over here is evidence-based. Our task is to practice it more and more and become very observant and see how we interact in our life with our own self as well as with other selves. If this eye becomes dissatisfied with the world it creates, i.e., it is unhappy with its present life, then it needs to start thinking differently within the confines of the Quranic value system. And this is a challenging task because this is something which requires a very high level of conscientiousness within us and also becoming far more aware than our normal day-to-day life. It is this very change in understanding that will lead to a different cognitive path in life. And once it sets out on it using the Quranic value system, then it will acquire a new life through own efforts. So new life over here will mean to start looking at the world with a developed self through our own efforts, that is iman and salih deeds, and try to see that can we transform this world into a better world within the permanent values of the Quran. And this is not an easy task. We have to make a lot of sustained effort on this path. And once we get a knack of it, once we understand it, then it becomes easier. If we do not acknowledge our cognitive side, which makes us aware of the existence of a self, we will always exist at the animalistic level. If we look around, the criterion for success in a non-deen world is always predicated on material successes. And this is evidence-based. And we can try it as well by discussing with every man and asking them what is their criteria for success in life, and you'll be able to confirm it what we have shared over here. And Quran is also saying that this whole attractions are created purposely so that we can bring out our best. We can bring out those latent potentials which are kept within us and to which the Quran is drawing our attention. If our self is based on a material outlook, then where is the life in it? I.e., it is content with the material world and its attractions. Whereas the need for a self or the hereafter does not even cross such minds. We should be very careful. It does not mean that we should not go for material successes. We should go for material successes, even within the man-made systems, but with a different mindset. And that is important to understand, that we should be able to differentiate between those people who are making material successes as the only way of being successful in this life. Whereas the Quran is drawing our attention to a bigger picture, and which is with the perspective of Deen. Continuing further with this verse 1693. Fourthly, despite being a tiny speck as compared to the size of the universe, in order for man to fully appreciate the true purpose for the existence of his cognitive potentials, he needs to know the operating domain of his thoughts. These can encompass the so far known universe and have the capacity to keep on expanding the field of view. What is the limit of the grasp of our thought processes? Scientists also ponder like this without the Quran, but they cannot relate this to the potential of the human self for an eternal life. It is by understanding Allah's creation and its purpose from the Quran that we humans can give meaning to the universe, its relation to our existence here, and then the connection of the developed self to the life of the hereafter. Fifthly, Allah is drawing our attention to the importance of providing choice and intent and then making available His Wahi for guidance, that this new form of creation of our new life is placed within the reach of each one of us. The fact is that we are here and that our death is staring us in the face. Hence, if we feel the need for guidance, not out of fear of death, after becoming dissatisfied with the man-made systems, then we need to bring out our latent potentials to which our attention is drawn by Allah, i.e. to His attributes, to manifest these in the human world. Death should not be seen as something about which we should be fearful. Quran is asking us to use death as a time of respite as far as this world is concerned, and to maximize our efforts so that we can get the maximum out of our life, even within the constraints which are put on us through the man-made systems. We should recognize that there are limitations, of course, within the man-made system, but that does not mean that we cannot go on and understanding the Quran and practice some of the solid deeds and bring out our best in this life, individually as well as by coming together. Removing our dissonances. Sixthly, by stating in the verse that وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَا جَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً, Allah has drawn our attention to this point, that this unity is possible if we strive for this in the world. The formula is called Rububiyat as a system. Understand and acquire this attribute of Rabb and then start to work together with this aim in mind. As a precondition, create a self which has its differences removed with those who also share the same goal in their life. And this is something very interesting, because if we remove our differences at a smaller scale, then obviously the same model, prototype, can be made applicable to whole of the world. For example, even within the family, if we practice it and remove our differences using the Quran, then that means that others can also join in and we can extend this invitation to others. The issue for us is that we cannot explain this until we make ourselves free from our own inner dissonances. Once differences become removed at the microscale level, then the self so developed will understand the newly acquired psyche and can explain to others its outlook, vision, functioning under the Quranic value system, and above all, the pleasure of acquiring a dissonance-free self. We have discussed some important aspects of a developed self in previous presentations, for example, patience, steadfastness, inner unity of purpose, setting a high goal in life based on the guidance of Wahi, understanding of the Quranic value system, uncompromising resolve. Very important. At every stage in our life, we should be absolutely alert that people who are weak in their values, they are not distracting us. Complete trust in the laws of Allah, the ability to refer back to the Quran on every crossroad of life, hearts united with other mu'mineen. Further reflections. The next part of the verse, وَلَكِنْ يُضِلُّ مَن يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ, is translated as, and it is very wrongly translated, but He leaves straying whom He pleases and He guides whom He pleases. Because over here they think it is about Allah. It is not about Allah, it is about us human beings, which is not the correct interpretation, as it contradicts the first part as well as what follows it, i.e. وَلَا تُسْأَلُنَّ أَمَّا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ, but you shall certainly be called to account for all your actions. The meaning of وَلَكِنْ يُضِلُّ مَن يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ is, but whichever person wishes to go astray will remain astray, and the person who wishes to have guidance, he will find guidance. This interpretation will be in line with the overall teaching of the Quran, i.e. everyone is accountable for his choices and decisions in life. The correct meaning of the term man yasha'u, which is normally said that it is related to Allah, the action over here, the one who is acting is man himself. By keeping in view the context of the law of requital is that in which man is taken to be the responsible entity. in our life, there is always more than one choice available to us, and whatever choice we make, the same kind of outcomes will appear before us. This aspect is discussed in detail in the book titled The Human Self and Its Destiny, that is Kitab al-Taqdeer by Allama Parvez. We go to the next verse, 1694. Our words and deeds impact our self-development. وَلَا تَتَّخِذُوا إِيمَانَكُمْ دَخَلًا بَيْنَكُمْ فَتَزِلَّ قَدَمٌ بَعْدَ ثُبُوتِهَا وَتَذُوقُوا السُّوءَ بِمَا صَدَّدتُّمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَلَكُمْ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. Hence, this matter is again reiterated that you should not make your agreements, words, and contracts the cause for mutual deception and conflict. Remember, if you do this, then your feet will become uprooted after having been firmly established, and trouble will descend upon you. Very important point, and we'll go through some of its details. This will be because you hindered yourself from treading on the path proposed by Allah. Due to this, a severe destruction will engulf you. A society in which importance is not given to agreements and covenants can neither achieve resoluteness nor peace. Never take promises and agreements lightly. As we know, the Quran has placed repeated emphasis on fulfilling our commitments, and there should never be any contradiction in what we say and do. In order to eliminate this temptation towards not fulfilling our commitments or to attempt to engage in falsehoods in order to acquire some immediate benefit, we need to practice reminding ourselves of the law of requital. In a world where even the agreed charter, for example, human rights under the UNO, is being torn to pieces by the powerful nations on a regular basis, even within the countries and nations, the rulers are going against these human rights. And we see plenty of evidence in the world. And there are minimal consequences for breaking a promise, particularly an informal one, not business deal. Because in a business deal, human beings think of the consequences. But where they do not see the consequences, for example, we commonly see people not, meeting a deadline, or not coming on time for some meeting, or not fulfilling any of the promises where there's no business transaction is involved. They take it very lightly. We seem to get away without any apparent accountability. The consequences can be figured out easily if we pay attention to the functioning of the law of requital. The Quran over here says that whatever you commit to, you must fulfill it, make full effort, because that is how our self achieves strength within itself. Often with those with whom we deal in life, we may appear to be avoiding any consequences of not living up to our word. But in reality, if we look closely, this affects our reputation on a long-term basis. We might think that we can get away with minor lapses where we do not live up to our word and agreement. This has an effect, because then we hear about people that so-and-so always comes late. And I've seen people saying that on Asian marriages, people always come late. Why do they come late? Because they do not take it seriously, and as a consequence, just see the state of their world and their countries and nations. The word spreads gradually as those who are affected mention it to others, and this leads to ruining the reputation over a period of time, and the consequences at times appear within our lifetime. Because time is a commodity as well, and it's a resource, and if we do not optimally use it, then essentially we start wasting our own life, and our own attitude towards our own life and looking after our own actions becomes weak. Further reflections on this verse. Here Allah has warned us that this becomes a hurdle on the path of deen, as such selves become handicapped by what they say and do. Another interesting point related to the human psyche is noted here by stating, فَتَزِلَّ قَدَمٌ بَعْدَ ثُبُوتِهَا. There appears weaknesses in our resolve to do things, and this gradually leads to the decline of the human self, which becomes visible gradually in the outer world, i.e. physical effects. Contrary to this, by following the Quranic instruction of yunfikuna amwalahum ibtigha'a mardatillahi wa tasbitan min anfusihim. And it says, by keeping wealth and possessions available as per the guidance of Allah, this will lead to strengthening of ourselves. Because when we are going through the Quran, it is dealing about our own self. It is telling us those measures which can strengthen ourselves. That is why it says that what you say, you must follow it through. And if you cannot do something, don't say it. And that is to which the Quran repeatedly puts a lot of emphasis. The next part then tells us that we take a good account of our own position, that it is not a cause for hindrance on the path of Allah. Here comes another important aspect, i.e., if we have a certain ability, even if we have acquired it, and we fail to employ it on the path leading to deen, it also becomes hindrance, because we could speed up things which would have been beneficial towards the cause of humanity. And this is an important point, that if I have certain ability, certain potential, and I do not use it, even if I know about it, then essentially I am slowing down the process of progress in the world, because I fail to participate in a positive way in the world with which I could have. And that is something very important as well, that if we can fulfill some of our agreements and covenants, and we fail to do that, then essentially we are a hindrance on the path of Allah. If humanity around us is suffering due to the absence of the system of deen, then we should try to figure out all that is wrong in the light of the Wahi of Allah. Have I and we done all that which I and we could do within the resources and means, that is material plus cognitive, available to us? And that is a question which we should keep asking us, because that is, we are putting some kind of an accountability on our own self. Because if we do not, that means we are not fully aware of what is going on within us and, of course, the world around us. Let us go to the next verse, 1695. Good comes by following the Quran. وَلَا تَشْتَرُوا بِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا إِنَّمَا عِندَ اللَّهِ هُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. Similarly, do not sell the covenant which you have made with Allah for the sake of a paltry vested interest. And we should go through this verse of Surah Tawbah and keep it in mind all the time, that once we come to the path of Allah, then essentially we enter into a very, very formal contract, covenant with Allah. It is unwritten, but we have made it. And if we haven't made it, then we haven't understood the Quran, then we are just wasting our time in going through these verses. If you are aware of the reality of the matter, then know that what you are going to receive from the direction of the system of Allah in return for this covenant is far better as compared to the benefit acquired in this way. Expanding this verse a bit further, we make a choice to tread on the path lit by the Quran, and as a consequence, we voluntarily enter into a covenant with Allah. If this choice is made after careful deliberation in our mind, as noted in, for example, 2:56, La ikraha fid deen, qad tabayyana ar-rushdu min al-ghayyi, wa man yakfur bit-taghute wa yu'min billah. There is no compulsion in the matter of deen. The path of rushd stands out clearly from wrong. That is, right and wrong, both paths have been illuminated and made clear in the Quran. Whoever rejects taghut and accepts Iman in Allah, then such a choice will never let us down in life. And that is important, because Iman means that we have accepted all those values which are given in the Quran willingly after understanding them. And once we have understood them, and then we know that this Quran will take us to that intended destination which is defined in the Quran very clearly. Here the Quran reminds us that at every step in life we need to distinguish distractions and temptations which may take us astray. How to keep on the path? By thinking about the consequences of the wrong path, and this is easy in today's world where the man-made systems are predicated on this assumption that human life has no higher purpose and ends with physical death. Next point is, the second part of the verse sums it up well. Innama indallahi huwa khairul lakum in kuntum ta'lamun. And we can see that how repeatedly Quran is reassuring us and also signposting our path, that you keep striving on this path together and you will see the results will keep appearing before you, first in your own self, how it transforms into a better or a higher self, and then you will see that by coming together how things will start to manifest in the outer world. Definitely what is with Allah is khair. good for you if you know, i.e., use your intellect, gather more information by striving on this path, and this will become evidence in itself through your own self-development. Becoming highly conscious of our choices and decision making is part of the process of self-development. How great this is that one comes to know what is going around within our own thought process and what is going into the thoughts of others. And we can relate to that and then look at the world in which we are living. And we also know that those who are not following the Quranic path, they are not going to succeed. And ultimately, those who are on the path of Deen are going to succeed. Next verse, 1696. Do we want an eternal life? The Quran provides choice through its guidance. Ma indakum yanfadu wa ma indallahi baqin wala najzi yannallazina sabaru ajarahum bi ahsani ma kanu yamalu. Whatever you acquire for your personal benefit, no matter how massive this may apparently be, definitely will come to an end. Very powerful statement of fact, and we will go through it in more detail. But whatever you acquire through the divine system, it will endure, it will never end. But this will only fall into the share of those who remain steadfast in the establishment of this system and continue to work for this program in a balanced and constructive way. Further reflections. Continuing from the previous verse, here the Quran takes us to the highest possible level of providing assurance on the path of Allah. And this is not a false assurance. Whatever Quran is stating is based on fact. And that is how we should look at these verses, that these are statements of facts. And how can we seek guidance, obtain guidance for these facts? And obviously by following this path. When Allah puts a statement of fact before us, then the Quran invites us to make an effort to acquire evidence from the outer world as well as from our inner thought processes for its application in our individual and collective lives. This is where we teach ourselves and help it to grow. It is through efforts that we widen the expanse of our vision. And we see it in our own world as well, even within the man-made system. If somebody wants to become an engineer, they have to go through all those books and all those practices which are required to train them and educate them as engineers. And same goes for the Quran. If we want to follow this path, then we have to come to terms with what is given in the Quran willingly. Let us look at it a bit more closely. Firstly, the Quran states that if you think life will end with death, and that your physical body defines you, then essentially this is what you will get. That means your life will definitely end with death. By living life as if it will end with death, essentially you have not added any value to yourself, as you never even recognize its presence within you, and so this becomes merely an existence at an animalistic level. This is a very powerful way of putting this aspect in front of us in the light of the Quran, because it's a stark reality that all of us at some point in time in this life we will die and our physical existence here will end. Then what? If all our life we only thought that the life will end with death and worked like that, then where is life? And that is the question which we should keep asking and keep reminding ourselves as we go through the Quran and keep striving on this path. Secondly, the fact is that human life simply cannot end with physical death. And this is what the Quran is telling us and then providing us evidence of it. How? By saying that develop yourself and you will find the answer to this fact. And you will find the evidence for this fact. And if this aspect is not explored by us, then essentially we have failed to bring out and manifest those latent potentials which are associated with such a pursuit in life. This helps to set a higher goal in life and puts our train onto a different track, and that track is called Sirat Mustaqim. Continuing with 1696, thirdly, the Quran provides answer to the first statement of fact by stating that وَمَا إِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ. What is with Allah has the ability to endure and grow. Just see the appearance of Allah here, i.e. with all his attributes. As is noted in the previous verse, إِنَّمَا إِنْدَ اللَّهِ هُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. An option is put before us, i.e., make a choice here. Do you want your efforts in this life to get you an eternal life? That is the optimum outcome for our efforts, and a better life in this world? If the answer is a big yes, then follow the guidance presented here and then see how the reality of your existence, and that will be based on evidence, manifests itself clearly signposted by the Quran. Our problem is that we want to understand it without following the path. That is, we want to see paracetamol, whether it removes our headache or not, without taking it. And in our own life, this is not possible. How then it is possible in Allah's word, which is all based on laws? And this is something with which we have to convince ourselves that we have to follow this path, develop ourselves, and then understand what the Quran is telling us. Fourthly, understand the process and procedure of this covenant made with Allah. The results will not appear before you immediately, and why should these appear quickly? That is, if we do not enter into a covenant with Allah, then how are these verses going to make sense to us? How these are going to develop ourselves? And this is something which we should convince ourselves. That is why Quran has said that you have to come to it willingly, because that willingness is the one which is the first way to lay down this foundation based on Iman. Because treading on this path brings change within the human self in measured and well-defined steps as per the scaling noted in the Quran. Fifthly, this commitment at a collective level, while maintaining individuality as a moment, is in this life until the physical death, with consequences in relation to ourselves going beyond the boundaries of death. And this is important because by coming together, we are essentially making a commitment that as we are together in this life, we will be together in the life of the hereafter. So we are actually investing for our future life right now through our own efforts. Concluding remarks of this verse, then the verse points to the fact that whatever we do has a consequence attached to it, and here on this path the consequence is called reward, i.e. wala najziyanna allazina sabaru ajrahum bi asane ma kanu ya'malun. The collective tense is used here, i.e. those who persevere on this path steadfastly with patience, as they have firm iman. And patience comes with this firm assurance, with firm iman, that the path I am following is the correct path. The path we are following together is the correct path, and it is going to produce positive results. And since life does not end with death, so it makes no difference whether the concrete results appear during my lifetime or our lifetime, or these appear subsequently in this world. That is of no consequence. What is required is to stick to this path. They will be rewarded with the best of their deeds. See the beauty of this. Ajrahum bi ahsane ma kanu ya'malun. And this best of their deeds is, the first change is within our own mind, within our own psyche. This is not something otherworldly. Their deeds will bring out their best and also create balance wherever they strive in this world. Since the Quran puts the most emphasis on the transformation of our inner self, because through this it is addressing us individually as well as collectively. Therefore, we should not let this focus disappear and think it is for someone else. If we do this or do not pause and reflect, then we will miss the core message directed to ourselves. For example, a question like this will help us to consider it seriously. Where am I at this point in time, and how does this help me to raise the level of my understanding? How will I enhance my self's value by fulfilling all my commitments and never uttering something which does not add value to myself? Creating questions for ourselves as we study the Quran helps to expand our vision for the system of Deen. Always remind ourselves, I'm not coming back to this physical life, and this is the only opportunity I have to give a good go to this life of mine and ours using the Quran. And over here I've drawn a schematic defining success in human life, word of 2023, the Quranic choice. If we have made this choice, then let us look at it, that what it means. And this is our path of life. and it ends with physical death if we think that the life will end with physical death. And what kind of priorities these people will have? Education is the key to success, because in man-made system, you need education, and education helps to prosper. Jobs, we need a job to live our life, and I should have a very powerful job which gives me more money, more power. And of course, family should have a family, children, and because that is where the Quran says human beings find joy and pleasure. And of course, a ladder where I can become rich and richer with the passage of time, because that is how one defines success. And then the house, and of course the car, and if one goes on multiplying these resources as one lives life, and that is counted as success for those who think that the life will end with death. And over here again, we should keep in mind that what is being stated over here is then we have to figure it out in the light of the Quran, that how should we change our cognitive outlook, how to change our intellectual outlook. The best way to predict your future is to create it. And I thought this is an interesting statement, because in the light of the Quran as well, we create our own future, and of course based on Iman. How should they define their success? Who should take care of their success? And there is a very interesting question here as well, that all those who think that the life will end with death and who are striving on this path, if we go and analyze their thinking and see that, do they think of them as well? Yatim and Miskeen is the starting point for the path of the Quran. Allah plus hereafter plus book, and that is where the Iman comes in. And then we accept Iman. And of course, this is a process. It is not overnight that we come to this conclusion. Latent potentials after acquiring Iman, and with a view to bring out our best, so that our abilities which are related and pointed out by the Quran, those can be manifested. And those cannot be manifested without knowing about the Quran. Just like if we do not go through the educational and training process of becoming a doctor, we cannot become a doctor. So if we want to become a Mu'min, we have to follow this path. And then we make a covenant with Allah and stick to it. And we see the clear advantage of following that path. And then we come together as a result of this. Because this Iman, if we have acquired, this asks us to unite with those who have also Iman. And that is how the hearts unite. Permanent values plus manifesting divine attributes, and then with sabr and istiqamat, that is with patience and perseverance, never ever to think of going away from this path. And that is the path which takes us beyond our physical death. Hereafter, life becomes on a different plane, and with this kind of intellectual ability which we acquire within ourselves, then we become fit for the system of Deen. And that is something for us to think in the light of today's presentation. And thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts, and you may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of Deen.